Satisfied Mind podcast. I've just finished the conversation with Lael Stone, who is a parenting educator. She's been working with parents as a childbirth educator for over 18 years with thousands of families. She's developed some incredible programs and she's written a book. She's built a school, all with the view to supporting parents and educators to help develop greater emotional awareness and emotional intelligence in children. It's a fascinating conversation with somebody who has an incredible depth of knowledge and experience in working with children. And we talk a lot about the impact of trauma on children and how we experience that as adults, both personally and in relation with each other, and in relation to our children, whether you are a parent or an educator, or just somebody working with young people, or somebody relating to others. We talk about the impact of trauma, how to acknowledge that, how to deal with that, how to work through it, and how to experience freedom as a result. It's a really fascinating conversation. Lael is an incredible wealth of experience and knowledge. You're going to love this. I hope you enjoy it just as much as I did. Hi, Lael. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Michael.
I know you're a podcast host, and you were just sharing some really exciting news about a guest that's coming up. I'm not going to give it away. I'll let you do the promotion of that. But that's really exciting, and it's probably completely irrelevant to anybody listening because there's no context to that. But I'm really excited for you.
Well, yes. I mean, I love podcasts. I mean, I think, look, I've had our podcast, which is the Aware Parenting podcast, for about 3 years now, which has been such an amazing thing. We don't usually interview guests. It's often, and my co-host and I are talking a lot about parenting, but yeah, we're very fortunate that we've got Dr. Gabor Mate coming on our podcast in a few days. So yeah, we were just talking about how I'm actually nervous. I'm never nervous speaking, but he's like one of my heroes. You know that when you say, who's the 5 people you want to have dinner with? Mm-hmm. Like he's on my list. So
Yep.
I figure
Awesome.
We might not be eating dinner, but I'm going to be chatting to him. So that's
you can just have a plate of food or something in front of you and that you can claim that as being, dinner with Gabor.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. That led us to talking about trauma, and I started asking you some questions, and then we're like, we better record this because that's the whole point of this podcast conversation. So I really want to get into that with you shortly. But for those of you, or for anyone who's listening who's unfamiliar with you and your work, tell us a little bit about what you do, and I'm curious as to why you do it.
Yeah, okay. I do many things. I often say I'm not the kind of, I just do one thing and that's I'm content. I need quite a few things going on. So I guess in essence, I'm a parenting educator. I'm an author. So I've just written my first book. I created a school that we opened a few years ago that's based all on emotional awareness and trauma-informed education. I am a speaker, so I do a lot of public speaking all around Australia. I work with the wonderful people at the Resilience Project, so I go and do talks with them all over Australia about resilience in children and looking at our own stuff as adults. I do a lot of work with parents, mainly. A lot of them come a lot of the time to deal with stuff with their children, but really when we're looking at any behaviour with kids, we always have to look at the environment and what's happening for parents. So I work a lot with parents around their own imprints and stories, around how they were raised and how that impacts their life now and how that turns up for them as far as parenting goes. So I do kind of a whole lot of different things, throughout my week is very, very varied, but mainly I guess my work is helping people to understand children, but also understand the child within them more than anything. And a lot of that then touches on things like trauma and what happened to us and understanding behavior and all those kind of pieces. So I'm also a mum to 3 beautiful kids. So I have a 22-year-old son, a 19-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old daughter. So that's been my main job for a long time. And I think the way that I got into this was really just through parenting and actually wanting to do it well, I think. So I started many years ago actually working in birth. I was a childbirth educator and a doula and a postnatal kind of trauma counsellor. And I got into that work after having my second child. I'd had a really traumatic first experience with my son. And second time, I realised I had to do it differently. And after having a really powerful, extraordinary birth experience, I remember remember just thinking, I just want other people to have really powerful, incredible experiences. And I'm the type of person that has to follow my passion. So at the time, and this is really weird and random, you know how nothing's wasted. At the time, I was actually a children's entertainer. So I used to have an entertainment company. We had all these people working for me, and we used to put on big pantomimes and shows. This is at a time when the Wiggles first started coming out. So I was kind of, it was right at that beginning time of children's entertainment. So I was doing that for many, many years. And then I had my own kids. And then I kind of went, oh, I don't want to entertain anyone else's kids anymore. I've got my own. But I also just fell in love with birth and the power of what that experience could be. I often think nothing's wasted. I look back now and I do a lot of public speaking, and I think all those years of having to walk into a room with 30 screaming kids and be able to command their presence and entertain them has been the best training for walking into a room full of really resistant adults when we're looking at stories and stuff. So I'm like, nothing's wasted, right? Nothing's wasted. And so really, I think once I started working in birth, I immersed myself in that for many years. And then when I had my third child, I had another big experience that really opened my eyes up more to trauma and how we heal from trauma. And then that took me into working with something called aware parenting, which is a lot of what my work has been based on. It's the work of Dr. Aletha Salter, and it really is about how we heal from stress and trauma, and how we can raise children to be beautifully connected beings who are connected to themselves. And then from that, I started working with parents and teaching workshops, and then that work evolved into actually building my school, which took about 3 years to build. And it's just kind of continued from there. So as I've watched my children kind of grow, I also spent about 5 years teaching sex education to teenagers, because again, as my son started to move through puberty and into that next phase, I remember thinking, oh my God, I don't know enough. And I want him to be really, connected man. How do we make that happen? So I went and did some study, and then somehow ended up teaching sex ed in high schools. And again, that was such a valuable, rich experience working with teens. So I've kind of followed the trajectory of my children's growth with my work. So now they're adults. They're like, enough, mum, that's okay. You don't have to do anymore.
That's amazing. So many interesting roles there. And I love how you've sort of just been drawn to each of those roles out of a interest and a desire to learn and to help and support. Obviously, you felt like there was a need at each of those stages for some awareness or some guidance or support that wasn't available to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've always been the type of person, when something's interested me, I'm like, I want to know more. And I really love the theory of doing the apprenticeship. I really think it's very valuable to go and learn from those who walked before you, who do know it. So I would often go to as many workshops or talks or anything that I could see of people who were doing similar work, and really take in what they were talking about, and then find my own flavor with it and immerse myself in it and go, well, how can I do something like this, but with all the other beautiful things that I've learned in the past as well? How can we blend that all together? So it's been, I'm such a lover of learning all different things. I'm not necessarily a classic textbook learner. I'm all about get in there, watch people, how does it look in practice, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I want to just touch on this the trauma. It's there's a lot of talking. I think there's growing awareness of trauma and the role it plays in shaping our behavior in our adult lives, with reference to our mental health. I just love to get your take on this. What is trauma? Does everyone experience it? And where does it start?
Yeah. Well, I think we're only really beginning to understand trauma in a whole new way, really, in the last 10 years, I think. We have, I think, what we have understood as trauma as usually a big event trauma, right? So like a car accident, or somebody dies, or you get attacked, or an event that often causes distress in the moment where we panic. We usually have that surge of adrenaline that fires through our body. We can often go into fight or flight, or we can go into freeze. I think people have been aware that those traumas happened. I mean, we'd say, oh, they've got PTSD from what they'd witnessed. And I think for a long time, we kind of just encapsulated it as they're big single events that happen and they leave you with a sense of shock, or you don't have the ability to process what has happened. The body's trying to make sense of it. You know, they're kind of what I think for a long time we've considered trauma. But I think we now understand that there are so many different levels or degrees of trauma that we carry as humans. So sometimes, and I'll talk about it in the context of children for a minute, you know, we can have children who grow up in environments where there is kind of a constant need to be on high alert. And that's because perhaps one of their parents is an alcoholic and drinks a lot, and they never know, or perhaps there's a lot of yelling. There's a sense of not safety for the child, and therefore their nervous system can't settle. They always have to be on high alert. And within that, what we're often seeing is that there's an accumulated trauma over time for children, which is really a sense of, you know, life doesn't feel safe. I need to protect myself. So we see a lot of children that experience that just from being in the family unit. And then we can have things like attachment trauma, which is just where, as little children, perhaps we don't get our needs met. So maybe when you're a toddler and you're really upset about something and you're crying, and your parent turns their back on you or locks you in your room until you're happy again. Or perhaps we get shamed for doing something wrong. They're little micro traumas that we can carry as well. So when we look at, does everyone have trauma? Yes, absolutely. I think everybody has trauma. We all have it to different degrees. Now, there's no doubt that someone who grew up in an environment where it was constantly abusive, it wasn't safe, you were, you know, your nervous system couldn't actually settle because we were like, I don't know if somebody's going to come into this room and yell at me or hit me, or, you know, we see that trauma often lodges pretty deeply in the body. And, you know, we grow up then to be adults that need to either control our environments, or that, you know, get into ways of being that are really about numbing themselves. So that's where we can see addiction kick in. So we are very, very complex beings. And I think when we don't have the opportunity to release the stress and the feelings from the traumatic events that happen, that is when it causes a problem. So I often look at trauma this way. We are all going to go through life where we have trauma happen, whether it's a car accident, whether we witness someone we love die, whether it's we get yelled and shamed by someone, you know, whatever it is, we are going to all have moments in our life where we don't feel safe, where we get a shock, where there might be attack to our bodies, all those kind of things. Now, it's not so much the event that causes the trauma, it's what we do with the feelings around that event that actually then lodges in the trauma. And so that is why a lot of my work is often around how we support children to release their feelings so they don't have to hold on to these big traumas that are happening in their world. So when we think about it, and I have worked with thousands of parents who've had all degrees of trauma, and when we talk about a trauma, so let's just say, for example, you know, there was a child and they're in a family unit, and we witness the father hitting the mother and then throwing things and breaking windows, and, you know, that's a traumatic event for a child. Now, that event that person may remember as a child of being really terrifying. And then if I ask them the question, okay, well, did anyone follow up with you after that? Did anyone listen to your feelings of fear around that? Did anyone explain to you what was happening? You know, most of the time the answer is no. It was just brushed over, or it wasn't talked about again, or, you know, I just went into my room and just kind of numbed out because I couldn't cope with it. And that is where the trauma often lodges in our bodies, and then will turn up in life in other circumstances where we are in an environment with a similar kind of theme, or perhaps where we feel in environments where we feel out of control, or any of the things that happen throughout life where that similar kind of quality of what that trauma is will often turn up again in our body. Our body goes, oh my God, I remember this. This is not okay. And then we react or we respond. So we might start to panic. We might have anxiety. We might start to get aggressive or angry. We might try and control. We might freeze what's going on, because a lot of time what's happening is that trauma is like, hey, I'm still here, and I need to move, because the idea of trauma is that we feel it, we release it and move it from our body so we can come back to our kind of homeostasis state. That's the idea. And the body actually has a beautiful inbuilt mechanism to be able to do this, but often we just stop it, or we don't know how to actually work with it.
Yeah, I think the we don't know how is is interesting. I wonder whether a couple of questions relating to this, and you can sort of take these wherever you need to. The first, the not knowing how, I think, is pretty common, because this feels like something that we're all, I shouldn't say we're all, that I'm learning about not for the first time, but I'm learning about in a way that I didn't know in the past. And I was a teacher, worked a lot with kids, and I'm only learning how to regulate my own nervous system in a way that is really helpful and really transforming my life. But I wasn't doing that a few years ago because it's not that I didn't know how, but it just wasn't something that I was as aware of. And so certainly there are more resources and there's a lot more education and understanding around this now. But is this trauma-informed practices and trauma-informed parenting and education, is this something that's relatively new? Because it feels like the fact that we're having this conversation and the work that you do, I'm sure you see a lot of, you're exposed to a lot of people with different levels of understanding. Is it new? And how do we go about learning how to do this better as parents and as adults, so that we can support children to process their experiences and emotions?
Yeah, such a great question. I think it really is new, and I think we have to look at where we've come from. So for really the last 40, 50 years, we have lived in what I'd call a behaviorism paradigm, which means if we look at again from the parent-child dynamic, the behaviorism paradigm is all about when you're good, I'll reward you, and when you're bad, I'll take something away. So most of us as adults would have been raised that way, which is you must be good. And when you're good, I'll give you praise, I'll give you love, I might even buy you something. But when you're bad, it is not acceptable. And whatever I deem as bad, right, as the adult, right? Mm. So I'll send you to your room, or you'll get smacked, or you'll get shut down. Now, what I think we have to understand is most of our systems have been created that way. Our schooling and education system is 100% based on behaviorism, because it's a really stretched system that's quite broken. It is all about getting children to conform. And of course, there's plenty of children who are like, don't make me mold into this box. I am more than that, and I don't want to be that. I mean, you will have experienced that as a teacher, right? And then they push up against it, and then we label that child as bad and wrong, and they're often not bad and wrong. They're just like, I don't want to conform because my spirit says I am like this. It doesn't feel good for me sitting on the floor. I need to move my body in order to learn. I need to talk about things in order to learn. I need to feel safe in my environment before I can even learn, and if I'm going to get shamed because my socks aren't pulled up, or because, I'm talking too much, then that's not going to make me feel safe. So we look at most of our systems and structures are based on behaviorism. So if we come back to why this is new, is that for so long our belief systems, or what we've been taught, have been all around when you get upset, that means there's something wrong. And so I strip it back to, let's just look at basic behavior, right? Let's just imagine a 4-year-old who's had a really big day at kinder, and, they've had to negotiate being in a room with 20 other kids, and someone knocked over their tower that they were building, and they couldn't eat really when they wanted to eat, and they feel unsure about using the toilet there, and it's really hard to say goodbye to mum to go to kinder for the day. Like, these are all normal 4-year-old feelings that a 4-year-old might have going on, right? And then when the parent comes to pick them up, they go home, and this 4-year-old's got all these feelings that have kind of been brewing in their body all day, accumulating. And then, mum says, do you want a sandwich? And they're like, yep. And then she makes a sandwich, and she cuts the sandwich the wrong way. And the next minute, the 4-year-old just throws the plate and loses it because he wanted squares, not triangles, right? And I'm sure every parent would be like, I know this. Yes, it's about the wrong colored cup, or too much ice cream, or not enough, or all those kind of things. And so we look at it and go, it's not about the sandwich, and it's not about the cup. It's the accumulation of all those beautiful feelings that little 4-year-old has felt throughout the day just by feeling powerless, which is a pretty normal thing to feel. Now, what our culture and society says is that 4-year-old's explosion is wrong, is bad, it's being naughty, when really that 4-year-old is trying to reset its nervous system. And the way we reset our nervous system is through crying, through raging, through laughing. So as children, we are born with this inbuilt healing mechanism to heal from stress and trauma. And how that looks is often through crying and shaking and releasing these big feelings. But our culture has made feelings wrong for a very, very long time, right? And you even think about, they talk about positive emotions like happiness and joy and excitement, and negative emotions. I'm like, there's no such thing as negative emotions. They're all just feelings. They're all just stuff that we feel. We all have the right to feel angry and frustrated and sad. But for so long, we've made that wrong. And so what's happened is, when we look at, particularly in regards to trauma, is we all have this beautiful inbuilt mechanism to heal from trauma when we have the right environment, but our culture's often made it wrong. So we look at little traumas that children might have throughout the day, which is, there's a new baby in the family, and that's really stressful and overwhelming for the older sibling, and the older sibling starts acting out. And what do? We tell the older sibling to be good and don't be a bad big brother. And that's not appropriate, when really that sibling's just like, this doesn't feel good. Nobody asked me about bringing a baby into the family. I had no say in this. Or it could be the teenager who's super struggling with identity and just belonging in school and the pressure of schoolwork, and it's all building up. And then, they come home to their safe environment, and maybe the parent asks something of them, and all of a sudden their feelings come pouring out. Again, we make these teenagers wrong instead of looking behind the behavior to go, I wonder what's happening here. What's going on for this child in this moment that's needing to move what they need to move. So I think, again, we have to take a look at behavior as a whole big picture, from little people all the way up to adults. I think what we have been indoctrinated within is, don't cry, don't feel, be happy, put a smile on your face. And when we do get upset, or we do need to talk about big or scary things that have happened, we only see it in the context of going to a therapist as okay, as opposed to just, we should be able to talk about how we feel. And as adults, we want to learn the skills to be able to sit with someone when they're upset and say, gosh, that sounds really hard. Tell me more. And not try and fix them, and not try and justify to them why it isn't that bad, and not try and say, oh, but look on the bright side. Just be with them for their feelings, because our feelings, it's actually not that difficult to feel them and move them, but we've just been so conditioned not to, that we've become so terrified of actually feeling, and we've become so terrified as a culture of being with people with their feelings, that we all just freeze, or we try and distract ourselves from doing it.
I'm just sitting here nodding the whole time, and I imagine a lot of what you're saying, it just really resonates with so many people in a way that it's like, oh, this, you're explaining what it is that I'm experiencing or have experienced in a way that I've not heard it before, or there's a validation of that experience, which I think is really important and new for a lot of people. What comes to mind when you talk about addressing what's beyond the behavior and going beyond behavior, and I love that concept. Do you feel, well, how do you do that as a parent or as an adult or an educator, either working with kids or just relating to others?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that when you weren't taught how to do that?
Yes.
And I know that it's our responsibility as adults now to take responsibility for impact of our behavior, and educating ourselves or getting some support to learn about how to regulate our nervous system is a good way to do that. I think it's essential that it starts with kids. I want to come back to talking about how you do that with kids in a sec. But if you're an adult who's responsible for parenting or working with kids, and you don't have those skills or resources to teach or be able to even regulate your own responses, I imagine that's just going to be extra triggering and extra difficult.
Totally. It's so tricky. And I think the thing is, I always come back to, firstly, compassion, because the first place that we can start when we're looking at, well, how do I change this belief system, or how do I change the way I respond to people, has to come from a place of understanding about where we are in this whole story. So the first thing I always do is I get adults to go, all right, I invite you to think back to, what was the imprint you received in your family about anger, or about sad, or about joy or about any feelings. Like, let's just go back a little bit. Like, what was modeled to you? Now, if you grew up in an environment where you had to walk on eggshells because one of your parents was often going to lose it, the story you will often take on board is anger is really dangerous. I must keep people happy all the time. So I'm going to grow up and be a good boy or a good girl. And that means, I'm constantly on the lookout to make sure everyone approves of me, right? I'm sure many people are nodding because they're like, yep, that's me, because that's the majority of the population.
Mm-hmm.
So what we firstly have to do is we have to go back to, well, what was modeled to me around this, right? What was the imprint I received? Now, when we can go back and go, yeah, I had absolutely no emotional guidance. I had absolutely no education around feelings. Feelings were not spoken about. We just brushed over it. We pretend, or we yelled and then we just forgot about it. Or we just had the silent treatment, or, as soon as I spoke back, if I was unhappy about something, I got smacked or whatever. So we begin to see firstly, that's the language that I learned in my family of origin, which is feelings are not okay. So the first place we need to come to is understanding where the story comes from. And then the next piece is to have compassion for ourselves, to go, wow, I grew up in an environment where my parents were doing the best job they knew how, because odds are your parents are just doing what they were taught as well. They probably had their own pain and stories they were carrying. So therefore, it's often very tricky for them to do the work. And I think we can often easily project back to our parents and go, well, why didn't they do better? And that's not okay. And then we have to be compassionate again to go, well, nobody was talking about it back then. And the internet wasn't there. And we didn't have access to information like we do. And we didn't understand the brain in the same way and all those kind of things, right? So we can go back and firstly go, yep, that's where I came from. And I'm going to start by having a lot of compassion for myself, because I was never modeled. I was never shown. I was probably spent most of my childhood in survival around a lot of this. So the expectation that I shouldn't lose it, or I should, not manipulate or control, well, we have to firstly start with, but that was all I learned, right? That was what was taught to me. Okay. So then once we get there, the next step of, I guess, changing how we respond to children is by firstly understanding, again, the brain needs to understand the theory behind this. So when we can begin to understand children are never deliberately trying to be bad or naughty. There is not a child in the world that feels good hitting another child or, speaking back to you. We always are operating from protection, which means every one of us, a child, adult, we are constantly going, am I safe? And if I'm not, how do I protect myself? Well, sometimes the way I protect myself is by controlling a situation, or by powering over someone else because something doesn't feel fair, or by trying to release these big feelings I've got going on because they're so pent up in my body, I'm going to do it by yelling. Like, we always come from protection. So when we can look through the lens to children of, what's behind the behavior here? What are they protecting? What is going on? Do they need more information? Are they feeling, is there a need that's not being met? Do they need food? Do they need a cuddle? Do they need someone to listen to them? Or is there an accumulation of feelings and stresses that are coming out in this moment? And can I be that safe, calm adult for them to release it with? So I think the first thing, again, we've got to come back to understanding why children do what they need to do. Then the next step, and this is the trickiest part, is being present enough within ourselves to observe that when it's happening. Now, this is, I think, again, another really important piece that we have to be so compassionate with ourselves around, is that when we grew up in environments where feelings were not okay, or perhaps where there was a lot of trauma, when we are in a situation where that similar kind of story pops up, whether it's kids are yelling or someone's really angry or someone's upset, when we haven't done the work on ourselves, we are often going to respond in the same way as what was happening to us. So if when we were a child and it was really dangerous and angry, we went into shutdown, often as an adult, when that same environment comes around, we'll shut down again. So we might disassociate, we might check out, or we move into anger and aggression to try and control it and stop whatever's going on because it doesn't feel safe. It feels dangerous. Right? I can't have somebody crying and expressing their feelings it's too confronting because it really taps into me around the fact that I was never allowed to cry or express my feelings. So much of how we change this story is in the observation of ourselves. What am I feeling in this moment? What is the reaction I am having? What is this about for me? Because so often when we're working with children, it is our responsibility to be curious about how we are responding so we can come back and be what I call the safe anchor for children, which means that we can sit in a place where we are taking deep breaths, we are calm, we are looking behind the behavior and knowing that this child is actually saying, can you help me? You know, the child is actually here waving a red flag going, I feel out of control, I feel powerless, I feel scared, I feel worried. That's actually what they're saying in the moment. And can we as the adults sit there, be really calm and say, hey, I'm here and I see you and you're doing a good job. Let it out. I'm right here. I am the safe container for you to bring all these feelings. Because anyone who's worked with children and hopefully has seen feelings move in a natural way will know that often it starts off as anger. And then if there's enough safety there, it will move into the big, deep feelings, which is the tears and the upset. Then it'll usually move into some big sobs. And then they'll kind of find their way back into a calm balance. And then their whole body will be calm. Their nervous system's reset. Their eyes are usually bright. They make contact with you. And then they're like, what's for dinner? Right? And then they just move on because they've moved through all those feelings beautifully. That's the goal. That's what we're looking for. And our job as adults is to be that safe container for children to learn how to process those feelings and emotions in a safe and healthy way so they can come back to balance. That's the goal of what we're looking for here. Now, again, I really want to emphasize when we never experience this for ourselves as young children, it is a really tricky thing to do. It is something we have to learn to do. And we learn to do that by looking back at our own story, by doing what I call reparenting work, which is about really understanding and embracing our story and holding space for the younger parts of us that never had their feelings heard. We learn how to do it by speaking to others, whether that's a therapist or a listening partner where we get to vent and have a cry or talk and they just listen and hold space so we get an experience of what it feels like to be witnessed and seen and heard in a safe environment. And when we get that in our bodies, we're like, okay, now I can learn how to do it for someone else. So they're the kind of steps we want to take in order to be able to turn up for children in the way we want to. And I think the thing that I feel deeply passionate about is the people who work with kids the most, which is usually educators and of course parents, often don't have an understanding of this. And so therefore what we're doing is we're just often re-traumatizing children again and again and again in our systems. And I think that is why our world is so broken and we see so much stuff go on with children these days, because nobody's listening really to their feelings. No one's really listening to our feelings. And it just accumulates. And then, you know, we're all again come back to this protection piece and are just trying to keep ourselves safe. And often the world doesn't respond to that. And so then it just reaches out to punish more. So, you know, we are in this loop that is worrying and concerning, and I do believe can change, but it's about the adults being willing to do the work to change it.
Oh, yeah. I can really relate to and with what you're saying, and the impact that we're noticing, that we're collectively as a culture witnessing the impact of not doing this work is pretty urgent, and it's a huge wake-up call for us to take responsibility for the impact that we're having. I want to talk a bit more about the collective container in which this work's happening from a systemic and sort of societal, cultural perspective with the school, because I think that's a huge challenge. I think, you know, the immediate work we can be doing is, as adults, is understanding our own nervous system, being safe anchors for ourselves first, so that we can do that for others and children specifically. So starting personally, I think is essential. I just want to shift to talking about emotional intelligence, because in your TED talk you talked about raising emotionally intelligent children. I think the term emotional intelligence is something most people are familiar with. I'd love to hear from you as to how you define emotional intelligence. Why is it important? And what's also really interesting for me is, why don't we do this? What are some of the barriers to raising more emotionally intelligent children?
Yeah. Okay, so, or if we start with what is emotionally intelligent children, or humans, really, it is our ability to identify when something is going on within us, to pause often and not react, in a way, but to be pause and curious and go, oh, what am I feeling in this moment? What is this about? And to have the insight into be able to sit with whatever the feelings are, own them for ourselves, process them, or go and talk to someone about them, or express them in a way that's healthy, to then come back to our center balance, right? It's our ability to interact in the world with others and own our story. So we live in a world where we are all about blame. We are all about projecting onto others as to why our life isn't fair, right? We whether we like it or not, and I know this sounds harsh, but most people are victims. Most people are, if only he would behave this way, then my life would be better, or if only my boss wouldn't be like this, then I would be like that. Like, we're all often about the projection of why other people are doing stuff and how that affects my life and why they need to change, as opposed to the questioning, which is, what is this about for me? I'm really curious as to, what am I feeling? What am I making this mean? So one of the things I think when we're looking at what is emotionally intelligent children, it is firstly and foremostly being able to model to them that feelings are all normal, right? And that we all have feelings. So one of the things I say when I do a parent talk is this: what do you model to your kids about anger? What do you model to them about sad? What do you model to them about failure or making mistakes? Now, most of the modeling we do around anger is, we get angry, we yell, we slam a door, and then that's it. Or we don't often cry, or when it comes to failures or making mistakes, we don't often share with our kids, oh man, I messed up big time today, but I felt embarrassed, but then I got over it and that's what I did. Like, how do our children can't be what they can't see? So if we want our children to be emotionally intelligent humans, then we have to model to them what healthy expression of feelings look like. So I will often say to a parent, next time you're angry, say, I am angry. I've got a whole lot of feelings going on in my body that are mine. And so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to put on loud music and I'm going to angry dance, or I'm going to go outside and I'm going to yell at the trees, or I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to just go punch this pillow. I'm feeling lots of feelings in my body. I'm going to go move it. So the child watches and go, okay, when you're angry, you don't project that onto everyone else. You deal with it within yourself. Or perhaps when you're sad, right? And children have got the most beautiful barometer of being able to tune into adults to know when they're off. And anybody who's a parent will know this. A child will come up and go, you okay, mum? And if we go, yeah, I'm fine. And we're not fine, then we teach our children not to trust their gut, because their gut feeling is like, my mum is off, right? And then when the adult says, no, I'm fine, the child goes, well, maybe I'm wrong, right? Which is, again, not what we want, because we want children to tune into themselves, to trust that innate knowing, to trust what their gut says. That's also emotional intelligence. So we're better off when we're upset and our child comes and says, are you okay? We're better off going, I actually feel really sad. I've got some big feelings, but I'm going to go call a friend because it feels better when I talk to someone and have a cry. Or I'm going to go do some journaling, or I'm going to go do some yoga, or whatever it is that makes you feel better, right? And then what we're doing is we're modeling to our children, this is what we do when we feel upset. So they begin to know feelings are okay. We don't have to hide them. We don't have to suppress them. We don't have to, project them onto someone else. It is okay to feel them. So that's the first piece. We model to our children what it should look like. And then we start using language around it. So when our kids are 3 and they're throwing something because they're so angry, we might be like, I can see you've got a lot of feelings going on. Do you feel angry? Yes. How can we get this anger out? You're doing a good job. I'm here. I'm not willing for you to hurt the dog, or I'm not willing for you to punch your brother, but I'm here to help you with your big feelings. And we model to them, your feelings are okay. There's healthy ways to express them. And then what happens after about the age of 7 or 8, as children's prefrontal cortex starts to develop, they begin to develop the language to be able to express how they feel. So they can walk into the room and go, I'm so angry. So my beautiful daughter used to walk in And she's like 8 or 9. She'd walk in going, Mom, I'm so angry. And I'd be like, all right, what do you need to do? She goes, I need to rumble. And I'd be like, come on, let's rumble. And what rumbling was is we used to go into our bed and have this massive pillow fight. And she'd be beating me with a pillow. And as she's moving her body and as she's yelling, she would then sometimes end up laughing and then sometimes move into crying. And she was basically going, I've got all these feelings. I need to move them in my body. And I'd be like, brilliant. Let me help you. Like, this is healthy. And so what this does when we start to do this with our children when they're younger, it sets up an imprint that says it is okay to feel. And I often tell a story about my beautiful son when he was 19. So this is the beginning of the pandemic. He'd been working in a job and, everyone was losing his jobs and he lost his job and he rang me and he's like, are you guys at home? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I need you both, like my husband and I. And he walked in the door and he took one look and said, he looked so upset. And he's like, I really need to have a cry. Can you guys be with me? And so here's my beautiful 6'2" human, massive giant, right? Who goes and sits on the couch and I actually sit on his lap to cuddle him because he's too big. So I'm cuddling him on his lap. And then I sit beside him and my husband on the other side and he just has this big cry and he's like, it's not fair that, they didn't even communicate with me. Like just those big feelings of devastation that you work through when you're, 19, 20-year-old and life was happening and everything. And we just sat there and listened to him. And we were like, keep going, buddy, let it out. And so he had a big cry, he vented all his frustration. And then after that, you could see his whole body relax. And then he goes, okay, right, now's what's the possibilities now? He opened himself up to what was next. Okay, that's happened. I've felt all I need to. Now I'm going to stay open to what the next possibilities were. Whereas when we don't often express those feelings and emotions, what happens? We have to learn to do something with them. So we often learn to suppress them. And that's where we often might start drinking more, or we make ourselves so busy, or we want to smoke lots of dope, or, we want to eat all the time, or we just want to binge watch Netflix or whatever it is. We learn these suppression mechanisms to not feel. And when we're in that and not feeling, it just festers and keeps going, keeps moving. And we don't then open ourselves up to possibility and what's next. Whereas when we can experience and feel the feelings, then we open a door to say, okay, and now, I can move forward. So that is what we want for emotional intelligence, for our children to then grow into young adults to actually go, when I feel upset, I'm going to reach out to the people that feel good for me. I'm going to express my feelings and then I can let it go. That is emotional intelligence, because then you don't have to carry this heavy backpack full of stories and shame and not good enough and that was unfair and all this stuff that we often log around with us all because we haven't had the opportunity to express our feelings in the way we need to. We just carry it. And some people go, no, I don't. And I'm like, oh yeah, you do. We all do. It's just buried deeper inside. And then it comes out when we get reactive, when someone doesn't do what we want them to do, or we think something is unfair, or our child responds in a certain way, all of a sudden those feelings come pouring out. You can't hide from them. Well, you can numb yourself enough so you don't have to feel them, but then that is going to have its consequence with you as well. So I think that is, I guess, what emotional intelligence is. And why is it so tricky and why are we not learning it? Because it would mean we'd have to all look at our own crap, and we don't want to. And this is, again, I say this with so much compassion. The reason why this is not mainstream in our society is because it asks of the adult to deal with the past. It asks the adult to feel all the feelings that weren't safe to feel. And that feels big and it feels hard. And there's a good reason why we don't want to do it, because it's painful. Yet it is actually the way through to freedom. It is the way through to being a sovereign being in the world. It is the way through to being a conscious parent. It is the way through to being a conscious partner. Like we have to do the work in order to be that. And, I think it's hard. It's really hard. I wouldn't have done the work really unless I was forced to, because I had children. And so, that was kind of you've got to get onto it and do it, because if you want to be the parent you want to be, then you've got to deal with your own crap. And that's how I started doing a whole lot of my work and a whole lot of trauma that I had to work through, so that I wasn't then projecting that onto my kids, because that's the goal here, particularly as parents. If we don't do the work, we unconsciously pass that same trauma and patterns onto our children. And our children are desperately sitting there going, I don't want to carry your stuff. Like, this is not mine. And that's why they push back on stuff. And that's why they behave in certain ways, because they're like, this is about you. This is not about me. But because we don't want to deal with it, we then just make the child wrong again. And really the child's like, I'm just here to be my own free sovereign being. That's the goal, right? But at the moment, I'm being weighed down by the stories of the past, and they're not mine to carry.
Yeah, it really does. It is really hard work to come to, but I really appreciate you sharing examples of what happens when we do the work, what happens throughout the process, and on the other side of it. And thank you for sharing that example of what your son did and how you supported him through that process, because there is a huge relief in sharing, and there's a new perspective that comes as a result of sharing and processing on the other side of that. And so what it sounds like is there's emotional intelligence has a literacy element to it as well, where we can learn to recognize, understand, label, identify our emotional state, and then bring in some tools and resources to manage that as a way of processing it. That toolkit is essential, and that literacy is something that we need to develop. I'm really curious now about how we do this at scale, and how we can sort of bring this into the way in which we not only parent but also educate kids, which brings me to Woodline Primary. This is such a fascinating school that you have founded. I'm just going to read a little bit from the website for people who are unfamiliar with it, and you can go into a bit more detail and pick up on the bits you want to share. But Woodline Primary is a small school set on a 20-acre farm in Geelong, beautiful Geelong hinterland. You've created a nurturing environment where you are welcomed with respect, presence, connection, and care. It's a safe learning space where you can be free to question and explore, a place to be who you really are. That sounds very countercultural to the well-established and long-established dominant industrial education complex, which isn't really set up nor designed to bring out to support children in their emotional education, because as we've established and as you've highlighted, it's really hard and it takes a lot of time. I'm really curious how you do this at Woodline, and is this scalable? How can more kids access this kind of education, because it's just so important?
Yeah, it is. It's a really big question. One I've thought about a lot around how do we change this, because I get contacted all the time by teachers going, how do we do what you do at your school in ours? And my answer is often this: it's really hard, because if your school still works on this behaviorism paradigm, then it's not going to work. If your currency in the school is I am the power, and you do what I say or else you don't get to go out for recess, or if you don't do what I say, then this is going to happen. It's the only way often to control 28 children with one adult in the class. Like, our system is not set up for it. So I think the first piece, and this is what we really thought about a lot when building Woodline, is that how do we set up the system to work for the children? So building something from scratch was extraordinary, because yes, it was massive, being able to create it, but we also questioned everything of how do we unlearn what we've done? How could we do this differently? So I think one of the beautiful things about building the school is Mel, who I built the school with, we're both not teachers, right? So I have taught most of my life, but not conventionally. I'm not teacher trained, neither is she. We came to this through the lens of, I came through this to the school through the lens of trauma and how do we make it safe for children to learn. She came through the lens of wanting to build something for her children where it felt safe to drop them off every day, right? Where she knew they weren't going to be shamed or judged or, be made to sit in the corner for speaking out or that kind of stuff. So we came to it from a completely different lens, which I think is what's made it work so beautifully, because we weren't indoctrinated in this is how schooling should be. Now, when you build a school, you still, to make it compliant, you still have to follow the curriculum, and we still have to do grading, and we do all the things that we have to do. But we look through the lens of how do we make it safe for the child? How can we make the child feel seen, heard, the full expression of themselves? So there's many things that we do on the small scale, and there's things on the big scale. So basic things like, our teachers are not teachers, they're called guides. So really our job is to guide the child. Everybody's on a first name basis. We really focus on connection more than anything. Who is this person in front of us? How do we get to know them? All those kind of things. We have small class sizes, so we have no more than 16 kids in a class. So again, it's allowing the adult, the guide, to get to know these children. And we have an assistant guide in every class whose job is to be there to emotionally hold space for children. So our philosophy works on this. When children feel safe and they feel centered and anchored in their body, then they're open to learning. But when a child is feeling stressed, when they have got a whole lot of feelings on board, learning is not going to happen. It's not. And usually what they'll do is then they'll behave in certain ways because they're trying to often reset their body or find their way back into balance. And usually the environment isn't conducive to being able to do that. So we make sure at our school, part of the education with our children is we want them to tune into themselves to go, how am I feeling in this moment and what do I need? So if we're starting some learning on some level, right, and a child can't sit still and they're really agitated and they keep yelling out and all that kind of stuff, our assistant guide's going to be like, hey, what do you feel like you need right now? What's going on? And that might be they go outside for a walk and visit the animals. It might be they go jump on the trampoline or go on the swings. It might mean that they go and build something with their hands. It might mean that they go run for a bit to burn off some energy. It might mean they sit and have a big cry and talk about what's feeling really hard for them in that moment. But we never make a child wrong. We're just like, what do you need? And so part of this is the teaching of the child to tune in and say, what's going on for me? What do I need? How do I release that, come back into balance so then I can do what I need to do? Now, we give, wherever possible, choice and autonomy to children. So that means they can eat when they want to eat. We have grazing platters in our rooms every morning so that, some kids don't like eating breakfast, but they need to eat by 9:30, 10. So we have fresh fruit and vegetables in every classroom every morning that the kids cut up, and then they're there. The children go to the toilet whenever they want, like basic stuff. They can sit where they want. They can move where they want. They don't have to wear shoes if they don't want to. Like, it is really about helping them feel relaxed and safe. And again, I often think many adults, if we had to go to school for a full week every day and sit in that classroom, particularly in primary school, I think we would all be angry and agitated as well, because it's being told what to do all the time. Now, it's not that this doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries and guidelines. We absolutely do have boundaries and guidelines, but they're all built on respect for the earth, for each other, for ourselves. So when a child is having a hard time, it isn't met with punishment and anger and shame. It is met with curiosity that says, what's going on here? Because our philosophy is that all children want to feel connected and feel amazing in their being. They do. Nobody feels good having a hard time. They're having a hard time because they're trying to move something. They're trying to process. They're trying to learn. They're trying to do all those kind of things. So when we look at it through that adult lens of curiosity, I wonder what's going on for them. How can we help them? What support do they need? What connection do they need? All those kind of things. Now, what's interesting is even in we're in our third year now, and watching us work within this in our system, what is beautiful and what makes me so happy is now we see the children being able to stand up and going, I need this. I am feeling like this. I need to go and do that. Now that is gold, because in that moment they are tuning into themselves. They are asking for what they need. They're processing. They're coming back. And then what's even more exciting is, we have to track the data and the learning. The learning has gone off the charts, right? And, many people I'm sure look at our school and go, oh, they're not going to learn anything there except how to climb trees. Well, yes, they do learn how to climb trees, which is also excellent learning. But our data is beginning to show the academic growth of the children is triple than what we expected, which makes sense because when children feel safe, they feel relaxed, they're able to learn in ways that make sense to them, then their learning is going to skyrocket, right? That is actually what it's about. So that's kind of the whole of the school. I mean, there's so much magic that we do at the school. We teach Auslan as our Lot language. So again, it's all about beautiful expression. We have a really strong Indigenous aspect to our school. We have a massive, beautiful Enviro program, and really we get the children to take care of the farm and the animals. And, we cook. One class is cooking every day. We cook a lot from the vegetables in our gardens. We're really trying to teach children skills about living in the world as well as reading and writing and all that kind of stuff. And also how we give back to the world. So that's part part of our program. So we're a play-based learning school. We use a lot of the Reggio Emilia stuff. But the people that we have working in our school who are just extraordinary, who so deeply believe in this, are taking, I guess, the vision that I had and making it even more amazing. You know, that's what kind of blows me away when I see what they're doing there. So, you know, I think I get asked at least once or twice a week, I get a message, email from someone saying, can you help me build a school? We want to do what you've done, which is amazing because I know that there's such a need for it, but it's hard to do. Building a school is very tricky, takes a lot of time, costs a lot of money. But there are things when we're looking at the bigger picture we can implement, which means we have to try and figure out a way to create more play and connection in schools as opposed to data. We have to add more to the curriculum. I think we underestimate the power of play for children in learning. I think we need to overhaul our system in the sense of looking at what even the curriculum is that we're teaching. A lot of it is of no relevance to us anymore. It was set up a long time ago. I think we need to look at how we can create, and, you know, I know this comes down to money and funding and all those things, but how we can create smaller class sizes, more connection, how we can upskill our teachers to do the work on their own emotional intelligence so that they are able to turn up and be with kids' feelings and emotions. I think there's lots we can do. I think our system is quite broken and it's a big ship to turn. I know that. Like, you know, I'm talking, we can do what we do at Woodline because we've built it from the ground up. Like, everybody who works at our school is on board with what we're doing here. Yet many other teachers I speak to say, I get this, but a lot of the other staff don't. They're just like, you need your teacher voice. You need to yell louder. Right. And I so get it. I absolutely get it. You know, my kids went through that system. I went through that system. I hated that system. You know, I think part of why I built this school was to heal my own trauma from education. So it can be done. But I think, you know, it looks at, again, the adults doing the work of really revising what it is that we think is important, because I think what our education system is still saying is get good grades, be good, get into a good university, get a good job, drive a fast car, and then you're a success. And we know that that's all crap, right? We know that that's actually not what success is. Where is the human in this? You know, what is a healthy, amazing human? One that is connected to themselves, that can speak their truth, who has really positive interactions and relationships, who follows their passion, knows what they love to do. Like, that is a better measure of success than the money and the prestige and the power. And that's what our world's based on at the moment. And we can clearly see it's not working, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's time for change. And I go, well, if we start educating these kids in a different way, who are not going to stand for that crap, like, that's what we see. They call out the injustice. They are all about respect for themselves and for each other and our planet. You know, we are educating them in a way to tune in, because when they tune in, then what they see out there and go, this is not okay, that's where we're going to create some change.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a enormous challenge to shift an entire culture that's embedded, a system that's embedded, and it has been for such a long time. And I think you've shared heaps of practical kind of approaches, which I really appreciate, because I know there are a lot of parents and teachers, adults who are desperate to make a change and really frustrated about the way in which the education system is operating, and the impact that that's having on their children, or the way in which just their culture and the environment in which their children are being brought up outside the specific environment and the contained environment of their home. For a frustrated parent or a frustrated teacher or educator who is perhaps overwhelmed by the challenge of making these important changes within a really dominant system that is pretty reluctant to make those changes, or not entirely supportive of that, that seems so well established that there's not much you can do. What would you suggest as a place to start, or something to do to affect the kind of change that is so desperately needed?
I would say it all starts with connection, because, again, if we come back to a theory, some of the biggest struggles we have with children is getting them to cooperate, right? It's getting them to do what we want them to do, whether it's to put their shoes on, whether it's to go to school, whether it's to do the writing, whether it's to take the dog for a walk, whatever it is. A lot of the struggles we have is because our children are like, well, no, I don't want to do that. Or I'm my own being. I'm not doing that. And so cooperation is usually where the rift often happens. But I think when we come back to this is that when children feel connected to us or to adults, when they feel seen and heard, they are far more likely to cooperate, right? Now, we're the same as adults, right? If we have someone who yells at us or shames us and then they ask us to do something, we're often not going to do it unless we feel like we're really going to get in trouble. We'll do it because, they've got the power. But if someone is kind and they're like, hey, I really see you and I know that's not your funnest task to do, but how could we make it better? Then we're more likely to cooperate. We're more willing to go ahead with that because we feel that connection there. So I think whether you're a parent or you're an educator, I always start by asking, where's the connection? Are we connected? Now, a lot of the time as parents, we're not connected because we're stressed, because we're busy, because we're juggling all the balls, right? I absolutely get this. And we are not supported in the way we need to. And we're just trying to keep our head above water. And even though we might be with our kids all day, we're not actually connecting with them. We're still thinking about the email we have to send or the dinner we've got to make. And, we're not actually present with them. They talk about some of the research that half an hour of present time or special time or just being with your child one-on-one doing what they want to do, half an hour of special time a week can shift a child's behavior, right? A week, that's nothing. So imagine if we spent 15 minutes every day just saying to our child, hey, okay, it's our special time. What do you want to do? And for 15 minutes, we don't look at our phone. We don't make a cup of tea. We're just present. You are filling up their love cup with that presence and connection, right? So that's something simple we can start in the home. The other simple thing is when they get upset or they get angry, can you take a deep breath, look behind the behavior and remember they're just trying to release these feelings in this moment. Can I sit down? Can I get calm and say, hey, I'm here and I'm listening, and let it out? Now, in the classroom, connection again. How do we connect with these children so they feel seen and heard? Every training I ever do for educators, one of the questions I ask all of them is, I want you to think about who was the most impactful teacher in your life, whether it was from kindergarten or secondary school or high school, primary school. What is the teacher that made a difference? Who was it? Every single story comes back with, because they saw me. Right? Nobody has ever come back with, I really like the way they taught me maths, right? It's about that these children, or all of us, in those moments with this teacher, they felt seen. They felt like that person got them. They felt like they cared. They took the time to know more about them. And you think about that, whoever's listening here and you're thinking about your favorite teacher, wouldn't you have done anything for that teacher then because you felt seen by them? Didn't you want to make them, want them to feel connected to them like we all did? So when we look at it as educators, how do we work on building that connection, which could be for 2 minutes, you go up to one of your students and you're like asking them about their dog, or you're just like, how you doing today and what's going on? It's in those moments when we're able to connect and a child feels seen or feels the safety of your presence, then that begins again a whole ripple effect of them being more willing to learn, but also coming to you when things feel hard to move their stuff. So I think as a starting place, how do we connect more? I would also really invite educators to really be super aware of using language that is shaming, that is blaming, that is sits in those punitive elements. That can be, it is so damaging. It is so damaging. I can't even tell you how damaging it is. I work with all the adults who had the damage as kids, right? So be mindful of the words you use, be mindful of what you do. And yes, there's times where you're like, 28 kids is really hard and I need to get them to do this stuff and I don't know how else to do it, right? That can be really, really tricky. But I really invite educators to stretch and go, how could we do this differently? How can we do it? There's plenty of educators out there who don't do it through shaming and punishment and rewards. There are other ways, but it really challenges what we've been taught and what we know. And it takes courage to step out of that, to see it through a different lens.
Yeah, absolutely. I not sort of across the current stats, but I know that there are a lot of teachers who start their career with the greatest and really genuine intentions of supporting children throughout their throughout their growth and their learning, their emotional learning, as well as their sort of social and cognitive development, but get really frustrated and disillusioned with the system and end up leaving. And it's not the reason why I left teaching, but there was certainly a frustration, and there's only so much I can do within a system that doesn't support the kind of changes that are being made. So thank you for sharing some of those ways of approaching this, because it is something that we need to work through in order to create better learning outcomes, to create more whole children. And there are so many great and really well-intentioned and really genuinely compassionate and super talented educators who increasingly disillusioned with the role and the environment in which they're doing it. So hopefully the work that you're doing and some of the suggestions you've shared will land and just keep people engaged and motivated to do this really important work.
I want to say to all of them, because I have the utmost respect for teachers. I think it's one of the most challenging jobs in the world, is just don't underestimate how much your connection means. Because even when we're in a system where we're like, this feels so broken and I can't do anything, your connection to these students, the way you turn up, keeping your heart open, connecting with them, matters so much. They feel it. So even if you feel like you can't do it the way you want to, don't underestimate the power of that.
Yeah. When you said that everyone's got a teacher that they can remember for how they made them feel, and it reminds me of that Maya Angelou quote, people will forget what you said and what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that's, I think, the truest thing that I've experienced in education as a teacher and as a student. It wasn't really until university that I had a lecturer, shout out to Donna Dyson, who's still a very important person in my life, who saw me as an adult, mature age learner, and saw something and really cultivated that. And took me a long time to have the opportunity to have a teacher like that, but actually life-changing impact that they have. And you don't need to be a teacher in a classroom or a university to do that. Just having the presence and the compassion, the empathy, and the intention to see, as you say, beyond the behavior is such a powerful thing that we can do for each other. And I'm excited by that, because what we're learning gives us the tools to really connect on a deeper level and address some of the reasons why we're not connecting, identify some of the barriers to that connection, and not just acknowledge that there are barriers, but to have some tools and resources to work through them. So I absolutely love the work that you're doing. I know how busy you are and how many sort of different roles you're juggling at the moment. But I just want to acknowledge the fact that amongst all the work that you're doing, you've written a book called Raising Resilient and Compassionate Children. I'd love just to hear a little bit about that, and what did you distill of all the things that you've done? And you've worked with, you worked with parents pre-birth, during birth, post-birth, all right through the different stages of education. How would you distill what it is that you've learned into a book? And if there's an opportunity to kind of share some key kind of highlights for that you've come up with us now, I'd love to hear what they are.
Thank you. So I co-wrote it with Marion Rose, who's my we co-host the Aware Parenting podcast together. And we, like many people who start podcasts, just go, oh yeah, we'll just have a chat and see what happens. And then all these people started listening, and then all of a sudden we're like millions of downloads all around the world, and we're like, oh wow, this really resonates with people. And that was kind of what made us go, let's just turn what we know into a book. And it's interesting because we do cover from babies all the way up to teenagers, but it's the same it's like they're tweaked slightly differently, but it's the same principles again and again and again. It comes back to connection. It comes back to making it safe for children to express their feelings, whether that's a little baby or a raging toddler or a hormonal 14-year-old. You know, they all need the same thing, which is our loving presence to say, hey, I see you and you're having a hard time and I'm here and I'm not going to judge that. So what our book does is it really talks about, I guess, where we've come from, that whole behaviorism paradigm of parenting. It talks about the philosophies. We talk a lot about the philosophy of aware parenting, which is the work of Dr. Aletha Salter, which is really about beautiful attunement with children, not using punitive discipline and helping to heal from stress and trauma. So we talk about that a lot in the book. And we talk about, I guess, the biggest things that turn up in parenting, like aggression, cooperation. Sleep is usually a massive one that turns up in parenting. What children are, what we do as adults to repress our feelings. So when we don't want to feel, how we can work with that. And we really, I guess, go step by step around ways to create this emotional intelligence and build resilience in your kids, which is around knowing that our job is not just is to protect them. Sorry, let me say that again. Our job is not to never let them have bad experiences, right? They need to experience adversity. It's part of how we grow as humans. And our job in building resilience as our kids is to make sure that we are there, we help them process whatever it is that's going on, they can let it go and then move forward. Like, that's what true resilience is. It's our ability to feel the hard stuff, not numb it and suppress it, but feel it, process it, and then leap forward. So we talk a lot about how we do that with our children in raising beautiful, resilient kids in the world, which comes back to making it safe enough for them to feel all that they're feeling. And the book also has a massive invitation into looking at our own stories as well. So, you know, my belief in parenting is this, is we can't look at a child's behavior and go, right, we need to change this, without looking at where that sits for us. It's deeply connected, both parts. So the book also gets us to explore, you know, our own stories a little bit, what happened for us, how that turns up in our lives, and, you know, takes you on a bit of that journey as well. So it's from people who are just new to parenting to having teenagers. There's something in it for everybody, because it all comes back to that same beautiful connected philosophy again of how do we as adults turn up in the way. And, you know, one of the things that I say at the end of the day, because there's so many different parenting tools and stuff you can talk about, but to just keep it really simple is this: if you were 4 or 8 or 13 and you were having a hard time, what is it that you would have wanted from your parent in that moment? And whatever it is that you would have wanted, do that. Right? Because I know from working with enough adults, it's not to be locked in your room and to be yelled at. It's not to be smacked or hit. It's not to be shamed or made fun of. What everybody deeply wants and craves at the end of the day is an adult to sit beside them and say, I'm so sorry, this seems so hard. And I'm right here and I'm listening, and keep going. You're doing a good job. And I love you just the way you are. Like, that's at the end of the day what we all want. And all wanted, and we all still want, right? That's what we're all still looking for. And as we learn to do that for ourselves and we embody that, then we can learn to do that for others.
I feel like just pressing end of this recording with that, because it's such a beautiful and simple and really, it feels really true way to summarize all of this work that, you know, that you're doing, and what we've been talking about, the concept of, you know, kind of parenting ourselves first and being that safe anchor for ourselves first, or the parts within us, those parts, or the, you know, child that's kind of craving and screaming or terrified, whatever it is, just kind of meeting those needs for ourselves. It's such a beautiful work to do. So I might leave it at that. That I was going to ask you for anyone who's listening to this, is overwhelmed as a parent or a partner, or as a teacher, you know, who's just overwhelmed, who wants to do a really good job and feels like they're not, and is feeling the kind of pressure and shame of not doing kind of job that they want to be doing. What could they do? But I feel like that's it, is to start with your own needs first, and
100%. Look, sometimes we need guidance. I think we all need guidance in the beginning, and that's whether you do like a workshop or whether you do some therapy or it's hard to often reparent ourselves right at the very beginning. So often we do need a bit of a guide or someone to show us how and use some of the tools. Our book is a great place to start, of just understanding the theory as well to then get to where we need to. I think, again, I come back to that compassion piece. We've got to be so compassionate with ourselves. We're undoing a lifetime of imprinting around feeling a certain way. And so that takes time to do that. So, and for any parent, because I used to be that too, the first 6 or 7 years of parenting, I did not enjoy. I didn't know any of this work. I was really in that struggle of, trying to get my kids to cooperate. And it was not, I did not enjoy it at all and felt like I was failing miserably. And one of the biggest pieces in turning that around was being compassionate to myself, going, I've been doing the best job I know how. And so each day I'm going to learn something new. And each day I'm going to keep taking steps towards being more comfortable with my own stuff so that I can turn up for my kids. So I really do know how hard it is. You're not alone doing it. There's many parents out there who are feeling the same. And I think it just takes one tiny bit of courage to go, I want to do it differently. And getting some support to do it differently is what creates the change.
Yeah. Lael, thank you so much for your wisdom and your calm and compassionate way in which you've shared that in this conversation, and for the entire body of work that you've accumulated through your book, through the podcast, through creating a school. I think there are people, who really want to make change and wish that things were different. And then there are people who go ahead and do it and make it happen. And I love that that's what you've done. So thank you so much for that work and for sharing it in the way in which you do. I will link your podcast, the book, the school, and anything else that you're doing for anybody who would like to find out more. What is the best way for people to stay in touch or connected with you to continue learning about how to be better parents?
Thank you. So you can find me at laelstone.com.au. Lael's a very weird name. It's Lael Stone, and there's not actually another Lael Stone in the world that I know of as yet. So if you Google me, I pretty much come up, which is good. So on my website, I've got all my courses and stuff that you can look at and stuff to listen to and free things to watch. And yeah, I'm on social media at Lael Stone as well. So yeah, you can find me there.
Awesome. All those links will be in the show notes. Last question I have, and I'm really interested to hear what your response to this one is. What does a satisfied mind mean for you?
Oh, that's so good. A satisfied mind. I would say one that is deeply at peace, which is tricky because the mind doesn't like to be at peace. So I think it takes a lot of work to get to that place. But for me, a satisfied mind is one that feels really deeply content with being home in the spiritual sense. So coming home to the truth and the essence of who we are and being able to sit in that calmly is, for me, what a satisfied mind is.